What's up, guys? Dave Lipson here, and welcome to another session of Q&A with Dave, the series where you guys, the Thundrbro community, get to ask me any questions regarding training, nutrition, or lifestyle to help maximize your training effect in and out of the gym and just help you bring thunder in your daily life. Although most of our questions revolve around training and nutrition, we dive into all different types of areas. And today we're actually going to look about some of the methods that we use in the gym, specifically some of the things that we use in our Muscle Anarchy online program that make it a little bit different, a little bit atypical to probably some of the programs that you may have been exposed to before. And we're going to talk about training methods, why and how to use them, a little bit of the science of what's going on inside muscle cells that make them effective, and how to best apply them, program them, or execute them when you're training. So today's question is really simple. Comes from one of our athletes who's asking, what are the benefits of negatives, and why does this happen? How should we be using it? Obviously, we do a lot of that programming on our end in Muscle Anarchy, but it helps to kind of know a little bit of the why. And a look behind the curtain, so to speak. It starts to make sense, understanding the intention behind this stuff and where it falls into the scope of training based on what your needs and goals are. So first off, muscle hypertrophy. This is the bulking or thickening of muscle tissue, enlarging of muscle cells. When a cell increases in size beyond its normal size, it's gone through hypertrophy. We're talking about hypertrophy of the musculoskeletal muscles, the large muscles, the striated muscles, the ones that help you go. They pull on bone, and that's really the point. They're really, in terms of development, the target in training. And the way that we get the body to adapt or change is by applying stress to it. The body's a really smart, dynamic, and impressive machine that's designed to do one thing: survive. And it's really good at that. But in order to do that, we need to take it out of its comfort zone. We need to apply a specific type of stress for a specific type of adaptation. It plays off of the idea of the SAID principle: specific adaptations to an imposed demand. So if we're thinking about just muscle hypertrophy or accumulating more muscle mass, we have to think about different types of stimuli in the gym that are going to make your body go, oh, fuck. I need to be stronger in order to survive. This is no good. I need to change. And then there's an adaptive response, kind of an overload of stress combined with an accommodation period. And then that just rinses and repeats through the process of progressively overloading or trying to demand a little bit more capacity in a number of different ways. Now, when muscle cells when they grow, there's a couple different mechanisms that are really good for helping them grow. The first one is muscular tension, right? How much force we're actually putting on the muscle, the duration, the frequency, the magnitude of that force is really important because we're recruiting motor units and we're creating a lot of muscle tension, and that provides a strong neuroendocrine response. If I just kind of dispel that whole word into layman's terms, it helps your brain stimulate the chemicals that make you anabolic, that the brain telling the body, we need to grow. Here's a little bit more growth hormone, testosterone. Here's the adaptive response. And that's just simply by going heavy. Now, there are other factors outside of just going heavy that are also really important. So another one is called muscle damage or muscle micro-tearing. And this is where acute damage occurs to the outer membrane sheath of muscle cells, specifically the outer membrane known as the sarcolemma. It's kind of like this covering that accumulates these large tears that heal and remodel, but when they remodel thicker. So accumulating some muscle damage is a part of hypertrophy. And the final factor that we can look at is called metabolic stress, which is just a cellular swelling going on in the muscle, the acute buildup of the byproducts of muscle contraction. This can be things like hydrogen and lactate that actually cause an acute hypoxia or lack of oxygen, because every time your muscle contracts, there are these byproducts of the chemical conversions going on that start to build up and block the ability for that stuff to process out. And you end up with swelling in and around the cell, which has really great protein enzymatic responses that are very anabolic or conducive to muscle growth. Some things are a little bit more effective than others when it comes to all three of these mechanisms. So I want to talk about the sweet spot first, and really where tempos and negatives fall into this. So first off, okay, A tempo or a negative, what people call eccentrics, refer to the different phases of a movement when you're lifting a weight. So there's a phase of the movement when a muscle is lengthening. Typically, this is when the weight is being lowered down, when you're not fighting against gravity. Say in a bench press, it would be the descent down to the chest. And if you think about what's actually occurring there, the way muscles contract is that there are two different types of proteins that actually hook onto each other and pull against each other to shorten a muscle. And these proteins are called myosin and actin bonds, or myofilaments. Now, when the muscle is lengthening, these filaments are actually separating. They're moving away from each other as the muscle relaxes. But if you don't actually completely relax, if you resist a little bit, resisting gravity on the way down, what's happening is you are contracting against a lengthening muscle, which causes a lot of damage to the sarcolemma, but also damage to those internal contractile components we talked about, like the myosin and actin filaments, which then heal, remodel, thicker, more numerous. There's something called myogenesis, where you actually can develop more of those myosin and actin bonds, which not only increase your contractile potential. I always make the analogy, it's like if you look at a piece of Velcro, you all see all these hooks that hook onto the felt. Well, it's like those hooks now appearing more numerous and thicker. That's obviously going to be stronger and have more cross-sectional strength. That's an important part to muscle growth. Now, too often we go in the gym and I see people just lifting weights without a lot of intention or focus on positioning or focus on the speed at which they're lifting that weight. If you are going to create a lot of force, right? So let's say we're going to do something near or close to failure, and we're going to work in a range that's typically anywhere from that 8 to 12 repetition range, which is generally looked upon as the sweet spot for hypertrophy, because not only are you able to create a lot of force around those rep ranges, usually somewhere above 70%, but you're also able to get enough volume in there that time under tension and that volume of contraction, which causes the muscle damage, is really important. So when you're lifting the weight, don't just go down fast, but take the time to think about your positioning, take the time to actually think about the muscles that are working, what you're controlling, and work with a tempo the majority of the time. You know, when we write stuff in Muscle Anarchy, a lot of the times you'll see stuff where there's sometimes tempo reps and the faster reps, or just straight tempo reps where we're holding a 3, maybe even a 5-second negative on the way down. We've even seen stuff where we've done 10-second negatives, maybe not as frequently, but that's a really cool kind of bullseye to focus on, kind of that 2, 3, 4, 5-second negative, because it's not so slow that we still can't load the bar up with a decent amount of weight and not only get the mechanical loading stimulus, which is great neurologically, right, the neuroendocrine response, but also great for creating the muscular damage and the micro tearing. So I'd say when you're looking at your training, that would probably, movements like that are probably what I consider to be the main course, right? The main piece where we're going to lift a pretty heavy weight, we're going to control it, that contractile speed. We're not just dropping it down and lifting it up as heavy as we can without regard to aspects of control, but we're still challenging ourselves enough that there are a lot of mechanosensors in there that are getting challenged to maybe do something that they're a bit unaccustomed to, or something that they're just not very comfortable with. Okay. Now, when it comes to some of those other mechanisms we talk about, like metabolic stress, these are typically now going to be movements that are lighter. They're going to be movements that are of higher repetition range. So now we're talking anywhere in that maybe 20 to 30 rep range. And they don't have to be done with as much of a tempo, because the idea is to just push blood into that muscle, because it's such negligible mechanical loading. Usually the percentages of high rep metabolic work is going to be somewhere in that 30, 40, 50% rep of 1 rep max range, that you don't really need to worry as much about the control of it, but really the focus is on getting, unquote, a good pump. Okay. Now, like I mentioned, some of these things are a little more effective than others. So force on muscles, muscle micro tearing, these are like really clear analogs to muscle hypertrophy. Metabolic stress can be effective, but maybe not as much as what we're seeing with just the actual force on the muscle to help it grow. So it's something that fits in really well towards the end of your workouts. And the reason for that is because there's such a large central nervous system demand when you are lifting a heavy weight, that if you were to say do something like a high rep metabolic stress type of pumpy, you're going to do 5 sets of whatever, 20 reps of banded incline bench press, you're going to really burn out those motor units, and you're not going to be very effective at lifting a heavy weight after that. So it positions better maybe towards the end of the workout or as a supportive ancillary piece after we've gotten some good mechanical loading and time under tension in maybe more of the, I call them the bang for your buck types of lifts. Now, here's another benefit that not a lot of people think about when it comes to tempos and negatives. As someone who's been training their whole life for a long time, pretty seriously since I was 15. So now I'm on my 20 some odd year of training. You put a lot of city miles on your body and you actually learn how to do things better. And, my philosophy is to do the least amount with the most effect. For years and years, I just tried to lift as heavy as possible, sometimes in that 1, 3, maybe even 5 rep max range, which is great, neurologically, but not awesome for muscle growth. And eventually, when you run your body that hard for a long time, inevitably you end up with injuries, right? Speed and load are a very clear analog to re-aggravating injuries or actually accumulating an injury because they're higher risk on joints, right? So when you're not controlling the weight or when you're lifting something at that 90% rep range or above, the risk is much higher. And you play the game of odds, sooner or later you get a little dinged up. So hypertrophy is great because it has a great hypertrophic effect, right? So it allows you to maximize muscle growth, which is most of us are there because we want to look big and strong. And it's a way to do it to kind of take those risk factors of speed and load out of it because we're not lifting as fast as possible, because we're not doing things at that 90% and above rep range. It allows an element of safety and consistency. And what I love the most about it is I felt like I was doing less, but getting more, right? I wasn't lifting as heavy and as hard, but I was getting more results just trying to maintain a proper position or putting myself in a position to force the muscle that I'm working to actually like pin it down to force the large amount of work on that muscle group, where when I was usually lifting as heavy as possible, I'd find some really creative ways to cheat. Or likewise, even if you are lifting as heavy as you can for, let's say, an 8 rep max, when you're doing it with a tempo, you're probably going to maintain better positions, and it's probably not going to be as heavy if I just said, lift it however you want. So there's something to be said about lifting on purpose with purpose. You guys got a little bit of the science there behind it, the hypertrophic effect of why we use these methods, a little bit as to how they fit into a hypertrophy program. And these things we're talking about are probably some of the more important mechanisms that you'll see repeat a lot in our programs like Muscle Anarchy. And then lastly, it's understanding that there's no one way to do things. There's lots of different ways to customize a program. When I had a back surgery, I was really sidelined for a while and I couldn't really lift heavy at all. So I did a lot of tempo training because this was great for, accumulating muscle mass without putting myself under those dangerous loading spectrums or getting into maybe poor positions, without the governor on it. So it's a way I kind of think about it like, if you've ever been to a bowling alley, it's like bumper lanes on the side that are there to keep you safe, but also get you results really well. And, I think it's also fantastic rehabilitation for anybody getting back into training or anybody who is maybe coming off an injury or a surgery. Doing tempo training is a great place to start because it's a good stimulus without the risk factors. And as you start to get good at it, you can start to ramp up the intensity incrementally, but don't let it get stupid, right? It's not a powerlifting meet, right? This is all about creating a physiological, a biological adaptation in the muscle. And by the way, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle because once that muscle enlarges, you've effectively increased your contractile potential because the muscle has more capacity. And when you go back and try your 1 rep max every blue moon, you'll be surprised on how that strength really carries over quite well. And you've got the physicality to support it, where you walk in the gym, you're wearing your work on your body, and people know this guy or this girl must do a lot of training. So that's it. That's my spiel. Obviously, you can tell I really believe in this stuff. You can find out lots more about it in a number of books that I've written, probably the best one being the Hypertrophy for Functional Fitness book that really dives into the science and the mechanisms behind hypertrophy theory. Also talks about how to blend it with performance training, CrossFit, or just kind of that aesthetics and performance being melded together, and the benefits of that, and how those are so interrelated. You can find, obviously you guys watching are in our Muscle Anarchy program, and you're probably very familiar with this stuff, but I think it's kind of cool to understand a little bit of the why. So the next time you're training, you know why you're using a tempo, and you know a little bit of the target that you're aiming for. Thanks for tuning in. That's a 15-minute answer to a one-sentence question. Dave Lipson out.